So the first step to creating your isometric illustration is to create a grid of guidelines. And what's different about isometric illustration is that the guidelines have to be a specific angle. So I'm going to show you how to do that on the computer now. So the first step is to go to your shape area and just select polygon. And just go ahead and just draw it anywhere on your artboard. And you're going to want to rotate the polygon so that it's 90 degrees from what you created. So it's actually going to be like this. And one way to do that is just holding down Shift, obviously. So now you kind of get points on the top and bottom. And what we're going to do is just turn it into an outline instead. I'm going to go ahead and make that a little thicker. And the next step is going to be to grab a line segment tool. And you're going to actually connect it to all these different corners to create a grid. Now, one thing you really want to make sure of before you get started on all of this is that you have your snap to point selected under view, but also your snap to pixel and snap to guide turned off. If you have snap to grid and snap to pixel turned off, then you won't have any issues with alignment. But if you have them turned on, then they're actually going to force your hand to magnetize to areas that you don't want. So what I'm going to do is keep those off and have snap to point on. And you can see what happens once I'm moving over these corners. Another thing, if you don't use it, have smart guides on. That will allow you to see these little icons pop up. So that's just a couple quick settings to make sure you can do this as accurately as possible. So I'm going to just take that line segment tool and grab it and from corner to corner here and create the beginning of a grid. So you should end up with something like this. And just double check and make sure that all your connections are actually going to these corners. So one thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab everything. I'm just going to group it really quick so it's one shape so I can just move it around. But in order to turn this into an actual grid, you're going to actually grab the shape and hold down Option and Shift at the same time. And just kind of scroll it over to the right. And you can see what happens is that it actually lines up and snaps to the shape you just created. So now you're kind of creating a grid by just repeating the shape. You can do the same thing by actually taking it and moving it down as well. So this is what an isometric grid is. And actually what's going to happen at this point is it's just going to repeat itself over and over again. One way to make sure that you can actually do this quicker is to just start by making 2 and then repeating itself over and over again. And you're going to have to get smaller and smaller. So what I'm going to do is actually start in this corner up here to my artboard and actually line it up to it. And this is kind of the beginning of how big it can get. So you can see if I take those two, I scroll it over, I'm doubling it up. And this is kind of an exponential process where each time you do it, grab the whole selection. You go from 2 to 8 to 16 and so on. All right, now we have this all filled in. I'm going to go ahead and delete what I don't need at the bottom here. And we have a grid. Now, the next step is to actually turn these all into a guideline for you to use. And what you can do is grab everything and then go to Command 5. And then now everything is turned into a grid that's actually being used as guidelines. So this is now something they can use and draw on top of, and everything will snap to point and not actually shapes anymore. And if you don't want to go through this process of making your own grid like this, we actually have a file ready for you to download. And it's basically exactly what we made here. So now that we have a grid in place, this is where we're actually going to start drawing on top of it and creating our illustration. So the next step is to talk about color, lighting, and how it's going to look as an overall style before we actually get into real illustration.